I wish I had put a question in about Hume. All right, E. Compare and contrast Locke and Rousseau's ideal governments. Identify at least one similarity and one difference. Who's responsible for making laws in each? Who executes these laws? Gerardo.
In Locke's State of Nature, he believes that private individuals carry natural law to
Right.
support it, while Rousseau, he, I can't think of that one right now.
Yeah, that's right, in the state of nature, but we're talking about in civil society when they have a government. How do we structure a government? How would people in the social contract want to structure their government? Hajar.
I know that Rousseau's like primary preference is like elective aristocracy, but I don't know about Locke. I'm not sure.
Okay, so the crucial thing here is to keep in mind that the distinction that's really important in both Locke and Rousseau, and sort of not as important in Hobbes because he thinks they should be exercised by the same sovereign. But in Rousseau and Locke, they both think you need to clearly separate the executive from the legislative. And so for Locke, you need to separate these two bodies, but you can give the legislative to whatever sort of body you want. It could be democracy, it could be aristocracy, or it could be monarchy. And you can give the executive to a different body or organization. Locke, I think, is usually interpreted as requiring some kind of representation in the legislative. So some representatives need to be elected. But the main check that Locke has on government, the main power that remains in people's hands is that they can revolt if the legislative or the executive oversteps their bounds. If they start taxing them unjustly, take away their property arbitrarily or capriciously, people can just overthrow the government. In Rousseau, we have the legislative and the executive, just like in Locke. And what does he say about the legislative? The people that make the laws.
The legislator, what you were talking about earlier?
So, good. The legislator is actually different from the legislative.
The lawmaker.
Confusing them.
So that would be, is that the answer to like who makes the laws for
Not really. I mean, so the legislator is this mysterious figure that comes in right at the beginning of society and presents a code of laws. But it has to be ratified by the people, right, by the sovereign.
Okay, but then who makes them if not the legislature?
Right. It has to be, yeah, no.
The people.
It has to be the sovereign. Remember, he says the sovereign is the state that gives laws, the sovereign is the body politic that gives laws to the state, which is also the body politic. And so the lawmaker, in the sense that they have to ratify the laws. So you're right that they don't actually draft the laws or write the laws. That would be more the legislator or somebody else, you know. But
So-
they have,
Would you want us to talk about both of that then?
I'm not going to expect you guys to talk about the legislative, because
Okay.
we didn't cover it, and it's just one of the more, the way I view it, the way a lot of people view it, I think, is that the legislature is kind of a deus ex machina, which means like something that comes from the outside to save Rousseau's theory. It's not a very well thought out thing, and in Rawls's interpretation of the legislator, he just says, Rousseau presents this mysterious figure of the legislator because he needs something to solve the problem of how you get people that are uneducated and irrational in the state of nature to endorse an enlightened set of laws. And he says, so he presents this legislator figure, and Rawls is like, well, we can just say it might happen by accident through a process of cultural evolution. And maybe that's what Rousseau meant. It's like, well, okay. So the point is that the real strength of Rousseau's theory is more on the legislative, where he says the sovereign body comes together in these assemblies. It's real direct democracy, and they ratify. That is, they approve or disapprove of the leaders, the executive, and the laws. So, and then what does he say about the executive branch? Sure.
Aren't they there just like as their powers like occupational? Like if they're not serving their purpose, they can be dismissed.
That's certainly correct. They're basically functionaries. We just hire them, and we can remove them at will. Isabella?
Doesn't it depend based on like population size?
Yes. Yeah, so he has a theory where there's all sorts of factors that determine what the best and most effective executive will be. If you have a huge population, it's really hard to manage. So if you have squabbling and infighting among the actual executive, that's going to make it difficult for you to exert concentrated power to control the populace to govern effectively. So a large population, you need a monarch. Tiny population, if you're just like Athens or something, why not just have the executive be everybody coming together in an assembly, just make it a democracy. If you're somewhere intermediate, it'd be good to have a magistrate or an assembly of some sort, but you don't want everyone showing up, not all the riffraff. Think about the decision-making costs involved and all the bargaining and squabbling that you have. It's better to have sort of an assembly of elites, an aristocracy, to sort of enforce the laws. So that's his idea there. And he says population is just one among a whole family of factors. He just uses that as an example to show, sort of illustrate the point. Okay, so that's all I'd expect from that. Yeah, Isabella?
Could you maybe go into more detail about Locke, the difference between the executive and legislative? Because it just seems like it could be whatever body as long as the people vote on it.
Yeah, so I don't think, he doesn't need people to vote on the executive. That's an important feature. And he doesn't need people to vote on all the legislators. I think he's usually interpreted, and I don't even know where this is in the text, I only read this in secondary sources. I don't recall coming across this in the second treatise. But secondary sources claim that he wanted some part of the legislative branch to be elected or representative. Not necessarily all of it. So in England, they had, I think they still do. I don't know much about British civics, but I believe they have some unelected lords in the parliament and some elected officials.
The House of Lords,
There we go.
it's like their upper house, but it doesn't really do anything.
Doesn't do anything, okay. But it's there. So that'd be perfectly consistent with Locke's view. And they need to be separate. You can't have them exercising the same function because then, since the executive knows that he wouldn't need to enforce laws on himself, he could apply them, if he were the one who made them, he could apply them in a non-general fashion and thus make bad laws because they wouldn't affect him. Things like that make it unbiased. Let's see, is there any other features? Separation. No, I think he's willing to have it be anywhere from monarchy to democracy. Sure.
Doesn't Rousseau also say that, he says that he who commands the men cannot issue the laws for them at the same time?
He who commands them.
Something, there was this quote,
Yeah, I think the key idea to keep in mind for Rousseau is that to maintain our freedom, it has to be the body politic that is the source of law, that is the legislative aspect of government. So that's the main reason for having that. Whereas for Locke, it's a balance of powers argument, where you'll get corrupt and oppressive government if you don't separate these two powers. Okay. Good. If you want to read in Rawls's lectures about the legislator, or review what Rousseau says about the legislator, and you want to write about that in this essay, that'd be fine. If you want to avoid it because it's murky, that's fine too, I understand. Okay, so that was E. How about F? What does Rousseau mean by the phrase forced to be free? Does Locke express a similar notion in his second treatise? Thoughts or questions? Yeah,
Rousseau has the quote where it's, man is born free and everywhere else he is in chains. So he's referring to a society, and that's mainly it, right? You're forced to be in the society whenever you're born into it, rather than whenever you consented to it when it formed.
Let me think about that. Is it because you're born into society? I don't think that's what he's getting at, because this is about a very particular society that's structured to be just. And he says, if an individual in this perfectly just society is disobeying the rules, we have the right to punish him. to force him to obey these rules. And that means nothing more than that we're forcing him to be free. Why? Because these rules and these laws express his own rational nature, his own rational self-interest. Do you have something to add? It's my hand over here.
No, that's okay.
Okay. So that's the idea. When the sovereign makes the laws, the sovereign is the legislative body, and when their decision procedures are governed by the general will, then when you follow the laws, or when you're forced to follow the laws, you're just forced to live in accord with your natural, rational self-interest. And this is the phrase that Berlin takes such offense to.
Yeah, wait, does Berlin say like if you're not rational, you're not free, and if you're not free, you're not human? Okay.
That's his way of interpreting Rousseau. Because Rousseau, one of the
That was
key features
what I
of
was
human
gonna ask.
beings is liberty, the ability to make choices. And so if you're just driven by impulses, if you're just driven by instincts, you're not free.
Yeah.
And if you're not free, the whole, there's no point in being alive. You're just a hunk of matter. You're a piece of meat.
So wait, could you answer that question with Berlin's answer or not?
Yeah, Berlin's interpretation of what that phrase means
Yeah.
is acceptable. What about the second part? Does Locke express a similar notion in his second treatise? I probably wouldn't ask it if the answer is no, because that would be a boring answer, right?
Or a trick question?
Or a trick question.
Just get 2 paragraphs out of people on nothing.
So for that, reread section 57. Locke says something like, who would call it a restriction on freedom if it only hedges us in from bogs and precipices? And Rousseau probably read that passage very gleefully. Okay, G I think is really an interesting one. So Hobbes and Rousseau both criticize